Hey, welcome to Integrative Preparedness. I'm Steve Smith. I thought I'd tell you a story about the Gypsies today. Um, Now, I'm not a gypsy, and if you're not a gypsy, you don't know about gypsies. Okay, it's a fascinating culture to the extent that I know about it. And it's a rather it goes back centuries and centuries and centuries, and there's different branches. There's the ones that are known as the Roma. There are Irish travelers that I mention in, I think, my third and fourth books. I forget. The fourth one's not out yet. So if you've already read the third and said, "Yeah, I read that, but I didn't read that in the fourth," where's that? It's because it's not done yet. Um, and then there's some Scottish branches. There's all sorts. Okay, throughout the world, and these are a people who um, developed a way, a very interesting way, of living outside the systems of the societies and governments under which they lived. You know, they're fairly common in Europe, fairly common in the UK and Ireland and Scotland to a little bit of extent. Quite a few active uh, families or tribes here in the United States. So I thought I'd tell you a little story about a situation that I had that introduced me to this. And it's a good lesson in leadership and group cohesion. When I was a young police officer, I'd probably only been on about a year. I was working off duty at a hospital down in Kansas City. And we didn't do anything. Most of us, we had off-duty jobs, so we, had more money to spend, and there wasn't really a lot to do at this hospital, but flirt with nurses and drink coffee. It was an active hospital. We were there to, kind of make sure everything was secure, but we didn't really have that many problems. Well, one day I got a call, which was unusual. Got a call that there was a problem in the cafeteria. So I went down, and and the cafeteria was full. I'd never seen it full before, but there wasn't an empty seat. And I went over to and the cashier kind of motioned me over, and so I went over. She says, "We got a problem." He says, "All these people that are in here eating, when they first started coming through, they said that guy over here in the, I forget, it was red sweater, yellow sweater, something like it, that he was going to pay for all of them. And then when we got to him and I gave him the total, he said, 'Well, I don't know any of those people,' you know." so, so what they had all done, they'd all gone through the line and gotten their food and gone over and scarfed it down real quick. And she said, "A lot of them have already left. A lot of them are already gone." So I got to kind of looking around, and I had heard that there was the queen of this particular tribe um, was there at that hospital for some surgery. Now, this is way back in the 70s, mid 70s. So I'm not giving away any medical secrets, right? Um, so I went up and I knew kind of where they were because we had seen a large group gathering up there. And when the queen had something going on, it was, I don't remember what it was, but it was fairly serious. And so all of them came in from all over the place. And the parking lots were just full of Lincolns and Cadillacs and RVs and these people, you could tell, had money. Now we know, they make their money in itinerant ways, and some are fortune tellers, and some are roofers, and some are seal your driveway with some watered down oil, and skip down before. But there were other businesses also. Anyway, I'm not here making a a judgment on how they made their living. That's not what this is about. So anyway, I went in, and somehow I was looking around this big waiting room up there, and so I was kind of looking around, and this guy saw me, and kind of just a medium sized guy, a little heavy build, but there was an air about him. You knew that this was the guy who was in charge, and as it turned out, he was the king, and his name was Steve. Uh, I remember his last name, but I'm not going to use it here. So anyway, I explained to him. I says, "Look, here's the situation, down there, and we're out, several $100s." And he kind of looked at me for a minute, nodded, and then he broke out into a big smile, and he says, "Okay," he says, "I'll take care of it." So he spoke to another guy, and in a language that I don't know, and they said some things, and the guy uh, took off, and Steve says, "Don't worry, he's taking care of it right now. He's going down to pay." He says to me, he says, "Here, sit down next to me. Sit down next to me. You want a cup of coffee?" I said, "No, that's all right." Well, the guy that was sitting next to him got right up out of his chair, stood there, and so I kind of felt like I had to. Plus, it was a good opportunity to kind of meet some different people, and and also I sat down. He says, "You want a cup of coffee?" Well, I'd just probably finished, 10 cups of coffee. So at first I said no, but he said, "No, no, 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 no. You want a cup of coffee? You want a cup of coffee?" So, I finally acquiesced. He said, "Sure, yeah." He said, "Well, what do you want in it? What do you want? Cream, sugar, whatever?" I said, "Well, just a little sugar." So he said something to this guy that was standing up in that language, and off the guy goes. A couple minutes, so we're sitting there, we're talking, and not about anything important, probably, because I don't remember what it was. Pretty soon the guy comes back, and he hands me a cup of coffee, and he's smiling, and he's standing there, and so I thank him, and I'm just kind of holding my cup of coffee and talking to Steve, and the guy keeps standing there. So I'm kind of wondering, why the guy keeps looking at me, and so I kind of look at him, and he says, "Is your coffee okay?" And then I realized he was standing there waiting for me to make sure that the coffee that he had brought me was okay, that he had just the right amount of sugar in it or whatever. Well, I took a sip, and I don't even remember whether it was okay or not, but I didn't want to keep the poor guy standing there. So I told him, "Yeah, yeah, it's okay." He says, "Okay." So he went and sat down. Well, I stayed up there for quite a while talking to Steve, and it was very interesting. And through the time that his wife was there for the surgery, I got to know him. I won't say well. I got to know him a little bit. They were a fun group to talk to. They never caused any trouble. We never had a problem after that. But I got to know a little bit about their culture, at least as much as an outsider as they will share with an outsider, which, you know, you don't know how much that is. And that's important to understand. People who think, if you watch that, what is that, Big Fat Gypsy Wedding or something like that, I've heard people talk and think that they know cultures that they have seen on TV. If you've just seen it, you don't know it. You don't really know it unless you've been in it or have lived with it or had a long-term relationship with the people in it. Well, anyway, the takeaway from that, and I see this with many other groups, and I'm talking about this over on Patreon with the the mafia is an easy term to use. It's misused term. I'm going to talk about more of the lessons from that tradition. Um, but it's one of those that people think that they understand but don't. And these are subcultures that have learned how to operate within larger systems that really, consider them outcasts, but do very well within those systems. And the reason that I'm doing this is that, very often, we talk often, don't we, about how we might find ourselves in that kind of situation. Even now, look what's happening around here. We're having police arrest people for going to a drive-in church service. We are finding that we are having to do different things because of certain government restrictions that are put on us that we don't agree with. Many of them, that are just flat out unconstitutional. And here in Kansas, we have addressed that, and I think I'll make a separate one on that. But these are groups that we can learn from a lot. The lesson with this was, as I came to find out, as I got to know these people over the few days that they were there was unquestioned authority in the king. Now that sounds like a funny term, doesn't it? That we would say king here in these modern times, but this is an old tradition. There was unquestioned, unquestioning obedience to the king. Although he never was authoritative, he was never acted bossy. It was always a request. Would you do this? So and so, go do such and such, please, whatever, like that. It was, and sometimes almost courtly. But there was unquestioning obedience to the king, and you could tell that he assumed that responsibility and understood the authority that he had. Also, there was a complete, or appeared to be, a complete unity and cohesion within the group. The children were, then there were a lot of them. The children were well behaved, well mannered, well dressed, polite, courteous, as were all of their parents. And I don't think I heard a squabble the whole time I was there with them. But you could tell that there was a unity of belief and purpose and family feeling and a definite feeling of identity. Now, the reason that I think this is important is because as we look at even what's happening now, and those of us who talk about bad times and societal collapse, we talk about what kind of groups there might be after a collapse. My books are about that. And a lot of people will say, well, we need a democratic system. We need this. And I go through a lot of the thinking process of this in my books. But I tell you what, in a crisis situation, in an emergency situation, those are not times for democracy. That's not the time to put it to a vote among people of different experience levels, different knowledge levels, and simply, to be honest, different ideas of what's right and wrong and how to do things. In those situations, you need a definite leadership and a group cohesion. And these are groups that we can learn from. These are groups, organizations, whether it's the Gypsies, whether it's the organized crime, whether it's, there's a couple others that I'm going to talk about over on Patreon. And I also use that term organized crime loosely too, because it doesn't adequately describe what I'm talking about over there. I talk about old traditions of people who had found that they had to rely on themselves in order to survive and to live well under oppressive regimes and government systems. And we have a lot to learn from them. And none of them were democracies. They were benevolent, okay, but it's a benevolence that worked under a strong system of responsibility and authority and shared values. So these are lessons that I think everybody should put a little effort into thinking about, put a little time into thinking about. What would you think after a collapse? What kind of a situation would you find yourself in? Are you a leader? Would you be a leader of a group? Would you be a good supporter? Would you be able to be a good member of a group? Whatever. Everybody has different strengths and weaknesses. And the first step of finding your proper place is to be honest with yourself about what those strengths and weaknesses are. Ideally, it should be that each family itself would be a strong, cohesive group with a leader, and that those families come together in a larger group, protecting their self-interest while also adopting the interests of the larger group, and therefore being able to develop and build better safety and security for the larger group as a whole. But to the extent that these things happen is going to depend on the quality of the people within them, and the quality of the leadership, and the solidarity and cohesion of the group. So anyway, that's kind of the lesson from the Gypsies. Those were it's a story that I've told a number of times through the years, and I remember that situation fondly because they were a great group of people, and I learned a lot from them. So I'll leave it at that, reminding you that we prepare well today in order to live well tomorrow. And some of that preparation should be thinking about what kind of a group is it that you feel would be right in a collapse situation, and what would be your proper place in it. And I'll leave you with that. And you all have a good day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.